maybe you can just kick us off here. Dr. Naughton, when you mentioned the reuse of containers, did you factor in how those containers are cleaned at home in your life cycle analysis? I think there was a great question from Annaby.
Yeah, as I said, so many assumptions that went in there that were very nicely glossed over in the high-level presentation. But yes, so the bulk packaging and the consumer packaging both require washing, reusing. So we did include it in the bulk. So there is a wash in the bulk, but actually not in the consumer. Yeah, actually, I think it was largely because in the detergent one, we reckoned the detergent bottles would just be maybe rinsed out at the end because you get the last bit of detergent out, and it wouldn't need rewashing. But that's not at all true for a food product. So yes, then you would wash. But certainly from the UNEP study, the consumer washing is really, really important. In any return reuse system, it needs to be efficient, and mostly it was certainly in other contexts. It was if that container is efficiently washed, so preferably in an efficient modern dishwasher that's fully stacked, then it would generally be quite low impact. But if it's hand washed separately in a big 5 liters of water that's been heated with our coal-based electricity, then it's a really big part. So again, LCA is also context dependent, but yeah, so efficiently run again also does refill systems and reuse systems. It really needs to be efficiently run, and that also includes how you manage that reusable container.
Yeah, a fair degree of consumer education that would need to go into that as well. Great question here from Sandra Doyle to Peter Sandkotler. Being a global player, do you find that local regulation is sometimes contradicting compared to other geographies?
That is a good question, and I think what we need to look at is the regulation. The regulation for the whole transformation is a complicated topic. I don't envy the regulators to do this kind of transformation from a regulatory perspective. What was mentioned before, carbon, emission reduction, circularity, reuse, all the systems that are coming into place are not easy to look at from an overall perspective. So yes, it's sometimes not easy to manage through local regulation from a global perspective, but this is something where we can also use forums like these to exchange ideas of how this eventually could work, and what we see works in some countries. I mean, you can look at EPR systems in Europe, and they're not working equally across Europe, right? They're established in most of the countries, but it is not given that they work really to the same level in all of the countries. And that's really one of the points of opportunity for the future, that we need to learn from where things work and how they work, which is a hugely complicated task. But I think for really achieving large-scale circularity, it's inevitable that we go there.
Given that, just as a follow-up, would it not then make sense to standardize the regulatory approach globally, to have a global set of rules and regulations and standards to harmonize things, given how interconnected, even though we are seeing some degree of deglobalization, given how interconnected the world is?
I think that's a huge opportunity. If you look at the global plastic treaty that is being negotiated between the countries, that maybe or is probably one attempt to do that. Now, the other point is, of course, how can this be really a meaningful multi-stakeholder process, so that we are considering really many of the factors, and we have seen how complicated an LCA is for a reuse model, or at least how multidimensional it is. All these factors would ideally flow into an answer that then makes sense globally. But I think that is an ambition that I hope for, but I don't take for granted yet.
There's just one more part then. I mean, would there then be any value in advocacy measures that the industry here can take with local regulators to help move that along, to help standardize the global approach to recycling plastics?
Yes, yes. Simple answer, yes. We do that in Europe. We do that in every country that we are operating as much as we can to bring a meaningful voice to the table. Where that is heard, we appreciate that. But that's for sure an opportunity for the industry as a whole, which is also taken in Europe very much forward. But this is a global play. I think the one part is the credibility of an industry that needs to be established, where we really walk the talk and really make sure that we are having credible steps forward towards circularity, and not just ask for frameworks, but that we are working in a framework that then we try to shape as well together with the regulators.
And another one from Sandra Doyle. I think she's going to win the best questions of the day. To Klaus
Hopefully
Peter
not to
Schmidt.
me right now, because I would love to hear others as well.
To Klaus Peter Schmidt, are the challenges over in Europe significantly different to those in South Africa from your experience, or are they similar?
I think they are quite similar. So in the end, at least for our kind of packaging, because we are talking here about large bulk containers, polyethylene with quite dedicated recover systems. So it's that is the same, and the challenge that we have is especially also linked to the products that are filled into our packaging. That is also more or less, it does not differ too much by region. Also design-wise, if we talk about this large packaging, it's quite it's quite standardized in dimension. I also think here maybe international regulation is difficult to achieve, but certain kind of standardization for sure is helpful. And so therefore, I would not say it's completely different. I think the challenge is, or it's not different at all. The challenge is a little the scale of economy you need to bring behind certain topics. For example, building up a recycling facility for a quite dedicated material stream like we need is much easier in Europe, where you basically can collect across Europe and the empty packaging and then centralized in recycled centers, and then building the same system up in South Africa, which is clearly a target, but it's a little more challenging. Yeah.
Peter Lucht, maybe just from your perspective on that question.
Yeah, I mean, I think the stats that we shared speak for themselves. To a large extent, it's quite a success story in terms of the volume of containers that we've returned to our facilities and have reconditioned, and therefore saved virgin material back into the market. Certainly, there are challenges around the recollect systems in terms of geographical location, but to a large extent, those can be overcome. I think the other challenge that we have is overcoming customer unwillingness to change or slow processes in changing. That's where we're finding the obstacles, where it's easier to stay with what's been done in the past as opposed to looking at alternatives. I think some of the stats we showed changing from steel, for example, to plastic, significant savings, one in reducing content and reducing carbon footprint, but the willingness or the appetite to change seems a bit slow.
Like in so many industries, you almost need a BA psychology to manage the human element of change and the inertia to change. But I think we're moving in the right direction thanks to Dr. Notten's evidence-based life cycle analysis. Now we're talking about data. You've got the evidence, you've done the studies, and you can really make a much more data-driven decision. And ultimately, I think that's where we want to be heading. Let's just open up to the floor, as we've got about 5 minutes left before we break for a much-needed drink. Please put up your hand, and remember to introduce yourself if you've got a question for any of the panelists here or virtually. Wow. A lot of really, I mean, the presentation has been so good. Everyone is now just absolutely stunned into silence. At the back over there.
Good afternoon. I'm Ayanda. I'm from Safripol. I would like to know how Plastic Coin work. I'm very interested in finding out how that app works.
Great question. I was having a look at that as well and thinking, finally, we bring some digital innovation into the ecosystem. Speaking of those new tools.
That can go into a lot of details, how this conceptually works, and we can spend time on this for sure, also offline, is that you have an app where you allow the pickers and every consumer to make arrangements on where to pick up what and how to plan then routes of how to collect the material. And so it's, if you will, I mean, simplified speaking, you could look at it as a Google connector, if you will. If you Google Map and you find out where we need to pick out different plastic where it is available, where people actually have sorted flexible packaging in their households and how that eventually could be collected. There are also pick-up points being introduced in the system where you can then intermediary bring the selected or collected plastic and drop it off there so that it can be picked from that point. So these, and then it incentivizes with a reward system that you're actually bringing these flexible packages or the rigid ones back to these picking points. So there is a monetary element as well that rewards the collection of the material. But this is really super high level, but there are of course a little bit digital backgrounds. These tools have been around or have not been around, but have been developed from various different parties. We have one of these collaborations ongoing, but there are more out there. So this shouldn't be a surprise. Maybe just a quick point. There is another one that Lucro is actually using, that a company that I mentioned in India, where they have been using the system as well for some time successfully to bring back different types of plastics and pay rewards to the collector.
Very interesting, and potential there maybe to even gamify that at the consumer level. Right? Do we have any further questions from the floor? Was it just that one? I think everyone's very keen to... Here we go. Graham at the front.
Thank you. Graham Holder, CFlex. Question for Dr. Naughton. It's a two-part question. One is related to the resource efficiency of different packaging formats versus the reuse system. So is there did you do any sensitivity analysis as to how much less packaging you would need to use before the single-use system became more interesting from an LCA perspective than a reusable, and I'm guessing there's lots of different reuse systems out there. The second point was the reuse opportunity. How big is that? I mean, how much of the market could we physically replace with reuse? And I'm thinking of it particularly from a flexible packaging perspective, obviously.
Thanks, Graham. Great question.
Yeah, so thanks for the question. The first part, we did many options, let's say, rather than sensitivity. Actually, what I didn't say, this part of the study was to create a sort of like it's a really multi-dimensional space. So we created this tool for the SA Plastics Pact where you can vary all these things, so the size of the bottle and the material of the bottle, and then see how they come out versus the refill system. So in a way, that's sensitivity analysis. We just looked at sort of various types of bottles and weights and materials. So in that way, we did. But it's largely based on secondary data, all that single-use packaging. But so it's following the fact that, as you get the smaller size, it becomes less materially efficient, especially with the transit packaging. So the boxes and the pallet wrap and everything that goes into bringing those is where the big, sort of the difference lies between that and the larger format size, the bulk packaging options. So we did explore lots. It's very multivariate. The size of the reuse system, I'm not sure at all. I mean, I think there was an interesting, at the recent SA Plastics Pact conference or meeting, the annual meeting, where they did talk to, not Sonke who's doing this, but other suppliers. And I think the thing that came through really strongly for me there was that there's a really strong uptake not driven from a sustainability or an environmental perspective, but just the low cost perspective, because you can buy a small volume at bulk prices. So in spaza shops, it's not actually uncommon to have a VAT. You know, there was a couple of other suppliers systems doing this in a very basic way, basically a sort of a plastic drum with a tap. And in that way, they could then sell their customers a small volume, and the customer brings their own packaging. And that was mainly, again, for non-food products. But I really found that interesting that it's not being driven. So I think there is actually big potential, maybe in markets that we wouldn't think of, because we're coming with our environmental or sustainability lens, was actually just as a, there is already quite efficient reuse. And one of the presenters there, I can't remember, also she said that in those contexts, it's very common for consumers to bring their bakkies to the spaza shop, because it's economical. So I found that really interesting. So I think there is potential, unexplored potential, or even potential that's happening in the sort of informal economy that we're not capturing. But in the flexible space, not that I know of particularly, actually, because I think the more successful have been, or systems that are up and running are especially non-food products, so detergents, like the Body Shop, you can go and put it in nice returnables, in a nice aluminium container and bring it back and refill it. But for the other is those plastic-free shops where you can, maybe replace packaging for pasta and rice and all of that. There's there is a chain in South Africa that do that, plastics-free or packaging-free shops, or nude. It's got very different names, but where you bring your container. And even in places like Pick n Pay and Whole Foods, they do Fresh Foods Market, whatever it's called. They do that as well, but the problem there is people so often just take a plastic bag and refill from the dispenser that is of nuts or pasta or rice or whatever. And there you haven't replaced that plastic bag. You've actually just substituted with another plastic bag. And actually a lot of those shops those studies on those dry refill systems showed that if you take a plastic bag, you possibly have a higher impact than the single-use package system. But if you're bringing a container from home to dispense into. But I have no example of where you reuse a flexible packaging. I haven't come across it now.
Super. Right. I think a warm round of applause, everyone. That's all the time we have for the panel.